asking the question. Let's go across to the debate. And joining me on the debate tonight, Aryama Sundaram, senior advocate. Joining us on the news are Manish Brayar, policymaker, Tushar Gupta, senior editor, Swaraj, Sanjay Hegde, senior advocate, Lokesh Jindal, senior Congress leader, and K.R. Suresh Reddy, member of parliament in the Rajya Sabha, belonging to the BRS. And Mr. Suresh Reddy, you heard the former Attorney General. Why is it that we are jumping to conclusions? Of course, we need answers. Even if it is a conspiracy theory, we need answers. But is the opposition jumping the gun when it already begins to come to the conclusion that there is a scam, there is a fraud, and therefore creates a sense of panic, not just in the markets, but across the country?
Well, it's not jumping to conclusions, Navika. Now, what the opposition had been alleging for a period of time, that there is this particular group which has been favored by the government and it needs to be looked into. Well, this has been the allegations or accusations or probably facts which have been going on for a while. So the government of the day needs to take cognizance of this, try to understand what the opposition is saying. Whatever has been said, that facts need to come out. And yesterday, the news which came out of, there's a fall of $10 billion. That's almost close to about, say, 8 to 10 lakh crores, which is a quarter of your budget which was presented being wiped out. So definitely, when a scenario like this develops during the budget session, and that too before the first speaker opens up his budget speech, it's a matter of concern and responsibility of the opposition to raise the issue. And what better platform than the parliament? Well, what did the opposition ask? The opposition said, this is the issue, appoint a JPC or inquiry through the Supreme Court, Honorable Chief Justice, let him appoint a committee and look into it, or allow us a debate in the House. We sought an adjournment. Now, these are the democratic parliamentary means which were at our disposal, which we have executed in the House. Of course, it's sad that 2 days got washed off. But the fact of the matter remains that when an incident of such magnitude occurs, the first thing which the government of the day does is they come out with a statement. The statement through the parliament goes to our countrymen, creating a confidence and also telling them the facts. When these don't happen, what is the option for the opposition?
All right.
So the idea
Mr.
of
Aryama
politicalizing
Sundaram,
it
Mr.
is one
Aryama
aspect.
Sundaram, I just want to ask you, is the opposition merely asking questions, or have they created a sense of hysteria which is adding to the fear in the markets? And markets normally react absolutely adversely to any kind of uncertainty and fear. Number one. And number two, is the government helping matters when there is no statement that's come out formally from either the SEBI, the RBI, any of the regulators, or even the government? Does it really help matter?
Let me answer each of your questions, Navika. As far as the first is concerned, politicians will play politics. Any opportunity they get to play politics, they're going to do so. They're not going to miss that opportunity. And what you have seen today is a natural corollary of it. So the politics is going to be played. That is one aspect of the whole matter. So far as the conspiracy theories which I heard Mr. Rohtkey say, I think that is something which will have to be gone into, the veracity of the report, everything else, and I will not comment on that at this juncture. I think it's completely premature. So far as allegations against the government are concerned, I for one, like Mr. Rohtkey says, have appeared very often against Adani for authorities, governmental authorities, and I know that we have fought those cases tooth and nail against the Adani group, so I cannot see any protectionism at all. But having said all that, let me make one thing clear. You see, such a free fall in a market, does not come only out of the hysteria which has been created in the last 2 days. The free fall has been going on for some time. Secondly, a free fall doesn't occur because of one report. You don't have such a huge free fall because you always have reports. The free fall occurs because investors have got worried, possibly foreign investors, possibly foreign financial institutions have got worried. Secondly, admittedly, there's a huge amount of public money and investors' money in this company, and such a free fall is, whether we like to accept it or not, affecting these public institutions, is affecting the investor. And therefore, I am saying, if in any company at any time in any market there is such a huge free fall, it is not, as Mr. Rohtage said, for somebody to give a complaint to SEBI. It is the duty of the regulator themselves to look into it. It is not a case of someone saying, here I'm giving a complaint, please look into the complaint, and the regulator says, I have not received a complaint. Let me say, any kind of company, any kind of stock market shares, if there is such a huge free fall, it is an automatic reaction of the regulators to look into it. And I think that is a must. But to play politics on this, I think is totally uncalled for. And to go into conspiracy theories at this stage is highly premature. But what is required is for the regulators to look into it and then turn around and clear the air, which will also give the confidence to the market, to the investors, to the public. And I think that is something which has to be done. And there are regulators who are statutory authorities, who are independent statutory authorities, and I think they are the ones who have to do their job now.
Well, the first sign of the government stepping in comes in as we are putting out the breaking news. Ministry of Corporate Affairs has started a preliminary review of Adani Group's financial statements and other regulatory submissions made over the years. This is being looked at by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and two senior government officials have come out and put out this financial statement that they will be looking into it, and that's the first formal sign of the government taking note of this entire issue. But the question, Tushar Gupta, continues to remain on why is the SEBI silent? Why is the SEBI not even reacting to the claims that are being made by the opposition that, the opposition has said, bhai, LIC barbad ho gayi, SBI barbad ho gayi, Punjab National Bank barbad ho gayi. The question is that all of these entities, LIC has less than 1%, SBI has less than 1% exposure to these, and as of now, their holdings are not in losses. They haven't gone kaput. They're still in the red. Yes, the profit margins have come down. When all these claims are being made, these fears are being expressed. Isn't it up to the regulators to come in, make a statement? Because, after all, transparency is important.
Look, the numbers are out in the public for everyone to see. Let's look at it, Navika, in a very non-sentimental matter. Because if we get into the sentiment, then either we are supporting one ideology or the other. We are looking at the market. What is the market telling us about Adani? That they do not have any immediate bond payments coming up that they cannot pay. That they do not have an asset problem. They have some very good assets on their books. That they do not have a short-term liquidity problem. This is what the rating agencies are saying. It's not an opinion, it's a fact. They are in a position to service their debt, which the banks are saying that we are not worried about Adani not being able to make their payments, and they have not defaulted in the past. And the last point, exposure. Now, until a week ago or 3-4 days ago, the opposition had broken into hysteria that LIC will go and sink, the public money is going to sink. And when the numbers came out, less than 1% exposure. And LIC, Navika, is the safest of the safest investment. Let's assume hypothetically for one moment that indeed LIC's exposure in Adani was going to go in a loss. Let's assume, it's a hypothetical. They would have made up that money elsewhere because it's safest of the safest investment for millions and millions of people. And even they are coming up with their numbers and saying, boss, even when the bloodbath is going on against Adani, Our purchase value remains lower than what the market values today. We are still in profit. So why is the hysteria? Nevertheless, Navika, it's important for the stakeholders, observers, regulators, opposition, whoever, to question Adani, question their credibility, go through their balance sheets. It's all in the public. Young CAs are going through the Adani balance sheet. But why are they not looking at the numbers? Adani, in their 413-page response to Hindenburg, had clearly stated that you're talking about a long-term debt profile to public sector banks. Only 25% of a long-term debt is to public sector banks, 8% is to private banks in India. The other 66% or almost two-thirds of the long-term debt is not to the banks in India. So what about the banks thinking? Where is this even theory coming from? Number two, you want to also question the credibility of the agencies that are leveling these accusations against Adani. Hindenburg is self-proclaimed proud short seller. They literally say that we create hysteria, we make money out of it. But today, for the opposition, the Hindenburg word is holier than God. Why? Credit Suisse, Citi, all of them have been fined for irregularities in the past for the 2008 crisis. In fact, Citi has paid one of the largest penalties for a civil fraud, almost $7 billion in the United States in 2014. Credit Suisse is 60% down since last year, and just in October 22, 3 months ago, paid a $500 million fine for the irregularities in 2008. Now again, Navika, I'm saying question Adani, scrutinize them. We have to look at that in a non-sentimental manner, because stock market is a place for tough players and people have all the right to ask questions, but also ask the questions of the agencies leveling these accusations and the motivation behind them. One final point, the Norwegian Wealth Fund, which said that Adani has a problem of human rights abuses. You know, they handle Norway's oil money, and one of the major exports from Norway is crude petroleum. You know, Navika, where does that petroleum go? China. One of the worst places for human rights, and we never see any such reports. So my bottom line is, look at it in a non-sentimental manner, look at the assets of Adani, look at the cash flows, look at the revenues, look at the future profits or potential profits that they may record, but also at the same time look at the agencies, their own credibility, who are leveling these accusations. Don't go into an alarmist mode, make your own number, strategic calculations, that's all.
Fair point, Sanjay Hegde. These all seem to be reasonable points that Tushar Gupta makes. Do you think we are getting into a hysterical situation without looking at a balanced way at the charges and also the questions of short selling and profits and the motives of those who are leveling the charges? Are you on mute? I quite can't hear you. I think you're on mute, Sanjay Hegde. If you could just switch on your mic. Oh, well, we'll patch him again. But let me get in Lokesh Jindal. Lokesh Jindal, reasonable points being made by Tushar Gupta. Would it help if the opposition in our country would also be reasonable when it comes? Of course, you have the right to ask questions, you have the right to worry about the public if the public is in danger, but is it right for the opposition to jump to conclusions, number one, and number two, to begin to really talk about LIC mar gaya, barbad ho gaya, SBI barbad ho gaya, when their exposure to the Adanis is just about less than 1%?
Yeah, good evening, Navika. See, we are not claiming that Hindenburg Research is a whistleblower. It's very much a short-selling company. It has its own vested interests in exposing or giving such forms of claims. But the larger picture is that Indian capital markets, it needs structural reforms which the government has been delaying. If you talk about the claims that have been made by the Hindenburg Research, when it claims that shell companies were created, profits were booked, fake entries were given, that is a practice which is still prevalent into the system right now. And when fundamentals are shaky, when loopholes are there, and the investor knows that these loopholes are exploited by private entities, it leads to weakening of the investor sentiment. Now, double taxation avoidance agreements are being misused. The general anti-avoidance rule which were brought in by Congress, they have been simply set aside, and we see that the government has been very lenient on the corporate houses. And the corporate houses, they have gone into a free way exploiting all the loopholes, trying to save corporate tax, evading taxes, and concentrating more and more wealth into few corporate houses. The point is, when is the government going to bring about structural reforms?
The point is also,
Still many of the corporate houses
the point that I would want to also ask you is, do you think the regime of retrospective tax was better? Do you think that Adani's just become so wealthy only today? Look at the numbers of his wealth from 2004 to 2014, from about 4,000 odd crores to 75,000 crores. That's a 20-time increase. That also happened in the UPA Sarkar. So should we say that Rahul Gandhi ke dost hain Adani ji?
Navika, such reports of Hindenburg research, they get accepted by investors only when there are loopholes into the system, which can be exploited. If the system is strong enough, if the system is resilient, if it has got enough of checks and balances, such reports are simply washed away. I mean, it does not have so much of credibility. It is only when the system itself lags, there are loopholes which are exploitable, which does get exploited in practice, that these forms of reports, they get face values.
You had a perfect system in the UPA era, now the systems have gone bad.
Navika, since we're talking about the credibility of the system and the capital markets in India, it's not like Hindenburg has not been going against the US companies as well. I'm sure Lokesh would agree that the Wall Street as a system is quite credible, irrespective of the history in 2008 and elsewhere. But they are quite a credible system with enough checks and balances. So why was Hindenburg involved in shorting Tesla even at one point in time? And Tesla today is doing pretty well. So how do you blame it on checks and balances, on corporate structure or corporate governance? Of course, reforms can be debated, discussed. Companies can be scrutinized. I'm not denying that. But again, you have to look at the motive of the short sellers, the kind of hysteria they're creating. My worry, Navika, is that people, just because of the political inclinations they have, are riding this hysteria mindlessly. That's my problem.
Can I reply? See, Tushar, the point over here is many of the corporate entities in India are family-owned businesses. They lack transparency and they lack information sharing that is required in stock exchanges and public market, in the capital markets. You cannot compare Wall Street to that of the Bombay Stock Exchange and National Stock Exchange. We have still miles to go. So over here, it's the government that is required. The SEBI is required to play a proactive role, bringing all information into the light of the public and thereby keeping an eye upon potential loopholes which are exploited. Now it is out in the open that, okay, Cayman Islands is a tax haven. It's out in the open that there are certain tax havens which are being used so as to create shell companies, have entries distorted, and thereby, erode all profits, stash them up, and via financial institutional investors bring them back in, issue FPOs, wash off all your black money. That's very much out in the open. But what has the government come up with? Nothing. It came up with a huge white paper that, okay, when we will come, we will bring back black money from abroad, but till now it has done nothing. So the point is,
now it's become about black money. Well, shift the goalposts. That's really the agenda Lokesh Jindal is displaying here. But Manish Bariyar, I want to ask you, the fact of the matter is that wealth of the Indian Stock Exchange has been affected. We've seen $100 billion being wiped out. It is wealth from India that has been wiped out. Apart from the Corporate Affairs Ministry just now issuing a statement, we haven't really heard of any investigation or statement from any other regulator. The question is that we can discuss the politics till the cows come home, that, oh, Adani is also in Congress ruled states, in Kerala, left ruled state, TMC ruled state in Bengal. But the questions will remain on, if these allegations are there, then who is supposed to explain to the public what's right, what's wrong, what to believe, what not to believe?
Yeah, good evening, Navika, and good evening to all the viewers. I think the first thing I would like to say is that the wealth is a notional wealth. It's not the real wealth which has gone down as such, right? It is stock market, and these shares are there. So they've gone up, and that when wealth goes up, that was also a notional wealth. And when it comes down, it doesn't impact the reality of a company, its turnover or its profitability. But yes, obviously the perception about a particular company goes up and down. Before I come and answer your question, I would like to just draw the attention of viewers about Nathan Anderson, the person who runs Hindenburg. I think, anything which comes from Western countries, we take it as a holy cow. The corporate governance standard in US and Western countries are very different from the corporate governance standard. We are still a growing economy. We are a very young nation as far as our economy is concerned. It's very different. Now, if you look at Hindenburg's report, out of 20 odd reports they have given, 2 of the companies have suffered because of that. And especially because, one was a fraud and the other was because of the standards in US of corporate governance is different and is pretty, it is rated on a different mechanisms as such. They have tried to do the same thing in China. They failed. 2 of the very strong companies in China, they did try to short sell. They failed. They tried to do that in South Korea, and they have failed. These are all family-run companies. So in Asia, typically, most of the big companies are family-run. That we have to understand. So anybody trying to find a hole in the fact that these are family-run companies, this is the reality. And also, our corporate governance standards are different. It is raising day by day. It's rising day by day. Second. So therefore, there is a huge question mark on Hindenburg report. It's at 10 employees and they do a hit job. And they have written, the headline is the biggest con job in the history of Indian corporate, in Indian corporates. And we have seen Adani has so much of assets. Speaker after speaker have talked about it. So obviously it was there to mislead. And it was a hit job which ultimately got successful because of the kind of hysteria which was generated. And they knew exactly that happens in our country, unfortunately. They know we have a vibrant media. We have a lot of vested interest. Another aspect which I would like to draw to the viewers, that Adani has been on target since 2015-16 in Australia itself. Now, there are websites and organizations and NGOs which are being funded by US corporations which are tracking Adani and the Mind story. And a lot of research they have been doing illegally funded by a lot of, left-leaning NGOs whose sole agenda was obviously not about economics. It was more political. So I see it more as which is why, I feel that it is not only about, the fundamentals of the company, which still remains quite good. And I think they will be able to get over these challenges over a period of time. But I think there
Sanjay Hegde, the question here is that let's not be emotional, as Tushar Gupta said. Let's look at the agenda, because NGO in Australia is called Adani Watch, as somebody has put out on social media. And we saw some of those placards during a cricket match as well. Sanjay Hegde, I want to ask you, should we really look at the strengths of the company, the assets of the company, the cash flow of the company? Because banks have said that there is no problem and they have not defaulted on any of the debt, and assets well cover the kind of debt this company has raised. So I want to ask you, are we getting emotional and finding a political brownie point amongst the opposition, or is it just one of those things that you find something to attack Modi with and just go after it?
There's nothing to do with Modi. There is nothing to do with India. This is a question of one company. It's Adani. It's India's biggest company. It was India's biggest company. In terms of share market capitalization. It was at 3,000 rupees barely 6 days ago. Today it is at 1,500 rupees. The question is, what are Indian banks and life insurance corporation and things like that to do? Do they believe in Adam Smith's invisible hand which regulates the market, or do they think that all the king's horses and all the king's men can put together this enterprise again? What's actually happened is that there is this company which has grown very hugely on debt. That debt has been leveraged on the basis of their shares or their share valuation. So when that valuation comes down, when the calls are made saying, look, your shares do not cover the value of your debt, where do you bring fresh money in from? And can you answer all your debtors? Can you service those debts? Where do you get that money? Do you get that money from the public who will invest? Do you get that money from government companies who will invest? And when you bring that money, will people trust you to handle it? See, whether it is companies, corporations, or great empires, they've all fallen when they have expanded beyond what they can normally handle. I was on another show yesterday where Mr. Basant Maheshwari said, look, they have assets, but many of those assets are not that which will turn revenue immediately. Their assets like Gujarat Ambuja Cement, which they have taken over, if they manage to sell that, get money, bring down the level of debt, bring down the level of leverage, maybe they will survive. So it's not, the question is not about Modi, Hindenburg, or anything else. It is the question of a crisis and the response to a crisis. How well do your institutions respond to this crisis?
Okay, fair
How
point,
well does
fair
the
point.
government
Tushar,
respond? How well does the
are
company
their
respond?
assets questionable? Do they not cover the debt?
No, they do, because otherwise that would have raised very serious alarm within the agencies, within the banks. But Navika, there are 2 points I want to make. I think for a lot of the people in the opposition and even observers, they think the way the Adani share price has collapsed is the first time in history. You go back to 2008 and you can look at the likes of Goldman Sachs. They collapsed 60% in 1 month. I'll talk about Meta. That's 60% down in the last year. Netflix at one point was 60% down. These are companies people know about and they use every day. Last year in India, Paytm, Zomato, all of them were down. And someone pointed out that, the fall doesn't happen unless there's something seriously wrong with the company. It's not always the case. It's sometimes the price correction happens. Sometimes the assets are overpriced. Sometimes the investors are re-looking at the business model. A lot of things happen. But let's stop assuming that the fall in the share price of Adani is the first time if it has happened in history. And let's also stop assuming that the share price will only fall, it won't go up. Number one. Number two, Navika, there's already this narrative being peddled in the Western media that, oh, the fall in Adani share price reflects the business sentiment in India. The India Inc. is being bullish for no reason. They want to target India via Adani. Now, we forget that, we call, oh, the system is fault here. We are running family businesses. There's no transparency here. Somehow the India system is, built on lies and frauds. In 2008, there was a systematic failure on the Wall Street. The dot-com bubble burst in 2000, another systematic failure. The Eurozone crisis, through which the Europe has not recovered even today, another systematic failure. So we are very quick to question the Indian systems, the Indian businesses, their structures, but we forget what's happening outside. We forget that the fall in share price is pretty normal. Credit Suisse, the company making allegations against Adani, is 60% down in the last year, Navika. And somehow we are sitting here and pretending that Adani is the only company that has witnessed such a sharp drop in the share price.
Aryama Sundaram seems plausible. I'm coming to you, Sanjay Hegde. Aryama?
Can I? Yes, you see, I find a basic fallacy in what the gentleman who just was speaking just said. And it is this. Of course, in 2008, prices came down. Of course, at another time, shares came down. But this is not a case where it is across the board. This is a time when the Indian Sensex, our economy has been rock hard, very high. Our Sensex has broken all records. And it is not that all companies have fallen. It is one company and one company alone. Now, on one side, we have it as this organization which proclaims itself to be a great leader in analysis, which has come out with the report. But then I think we should pause and ask ourselves, when this kind of fall is not from the man in Dala Street or the common investor who's got 20 shares or 100 shares selling his shares. This comes through heavy investors losing faith. Now, these are heavy, experienced investors who are losing faith. Now, my point is, this report may very well be completely wrong. But when there is such a free fall, any case, if one company there is a free fall, any country, anywhere, the regulator will immediately step in and look into what it is. And then if they feel everything is clear, they will assuage the feelings of every investor. But that regulators cannot remain aloof without involving themselves in it,
and
or
that's
wait
my
for somebody
question to
make a
Manish
complaint.
Bariyar. Manish Bariyar, the question is that's what regulators are for. If a company is in a free fall for 7 days, for God's sake, the regulator should wake up and assure that there is nothing wrong with the market. It is one company, and in that company we are looking into it, or whatever it wants to do. The question is, there has to be a reassurance, there has to be a statement. People can't pretend and look the other way. It doesn't work like that.
No, I would tend to agree with that kind of a sentiment, Navika. But also, since it's a very sensitive case, I think SEBI must be doing some kind of a due diligence and forensic exercise before making such kind of a statement. And with the kind of group and the number of the companies which Adani has and the kind of assets, it would take some time before it can really come out with a very credible statement. So it's not a it's a catch-22 situation. Adani name is pretty sensitive.
But they should start and say they're starting a monitoring.
I would agree with you, sir. I think one news was coming out about Department of Corporate Affairs. They've come up and they've started taking that. So they should have come out with that. But at the same time, I would like to reassert that this is not, as Mr. Tushar was talking about, this is not the first company which has come down, and this won't be the last company which will come down as such in such kind of a market situation.
So, Mr. Suresh Reddy,
bounce back, Navika.
yeah, but Mr. Suresh Reddy, so is the opposition jumping to conclusions just too fast? Shouldn't you just pause, take a deep breath, and wait for things to happen? Yes, SEBI should have said that whether it's looking, even the fact that it is looking into something should have been a statement.
Yes.
And then wait for something really to come out from that analysis.
Navika, if you heard all
That's
the panelists,
exactly what they should have done.
either were opposing or supporting, are very clear that something is missing. Why were the regulators slow? Why were the regulators quiet? And what did the government do? So to answer all this, to find a solution to this, opposition is not making politics out of it. A very constructive suggestion with a request to constitute a joint parliamentary committee, JPC. Now what would JPC do? JPC's job wouldn't limit itself to finding what the culprit or what happened in this particular case. But it is a perfect platform for the government to bring in suggestions
Aryama
so that whatever shortfalls were there in the system
is laughing. Aryama
could be
Sundaram,
rectified.
30 seconds to you. I'm running out of time. Aryama Sundaram. A JPC is the answer?
Well, I mean,
Let me
say
say this. JPC is certainly not the answer. Let me just finish. JPC is not the answer. On what is the JPC going to work? The JPC comes into it when there's already been some inquiry into it, when the regulators have already looked into it. JPC is not an investigative body like a regulator. So the JPC request is completely premature. What is required is for the regulators to analyze.
I'm sorry, 30 seconds to you because you've been raising your hand and I'm completely out of time. 30 seconds, Sanjay Hegde. JPC, only politicization. Should regulators first give the answer?
In 6 days, falling from 3,000 rupees to 1,500 rupees. Next week when we have a debate, will it be back at 2250 or will it be at 750? That is the real question. And the question is, what will the response be? What has the response been to prevent further losses? What is the response of the government and the regulators to save the small investor and to save the economy?
Well,
that's the question.
Fair point, Tushar.
Navika, the demand for regulators makes some sense. But are we going to sit here and set a precedent that every time a company loses stock value, we have a JPC investigating it, making it political?
Yes, and if that is not politicization, then what is? Well, we'll keep watching this space. Some concerns, absolutely valid, but are we jumping the gun? That continues to be the question many people are asking. And in the meantime, can we get some answers? Because that will assuage not just markets, but people of India. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me on the News Hour tonight. Good night and have a safe weekend.
The News Hour at 9 will be right back after the break.